All right, guys. I think it's a minute past 2 o'clock, and we would have to start our conversation today. I think in a minute or two. Thanks for joining us. Wherever you're joining us from, we welcome you to our conversation today. It's one conversation that I've been looking forward to, and I do hope that it's the same for you. And once the time is finally here, we'll definitely get into the conversation. My name is Kwabena Asare. I'm the impact lead for Sculptor, and I'll be moderating our conversation today. Now, getting into it, like I said, it's one conversation that I've really been looking forward to because when you're talking about culture, it's so broad, it encapsulates so many things. And as creatives, as business developers, as brands, there's always something to pick up from there. So our conversation today would look at how we can look at culture from a different perspective that would help our brand, help our business, help whatever product or service we are offering stay relevant globally and at the same time locally. So the conversation is being put together by Sculptor, and if this is the first time joining any Sculptor event, I think we would always want to introduce you to our way of thinking, which is simply captured as think upside down. And in think upside down, we look at, I mean, upside down, we'd have upside and down, which has almost all the directions, which we simply explain it to be that whenever you are building a brand, whenever you are building any product or service, don't have a one-way approach to it, or don't look at it from just one perspective, but look at whatever is happening around you. There's always something to pick up there when you are building something, and that's what we've been all about over the years. So I think if you haven't taken anything from the introduction, at least get used to the idea of think upside down. Now, I think before we get started, we are talking about culture today, so it would only be interesting to know what songs or what music you're listening to, or if you're listening to the most this week. You can just drop the title of the song and the artist in the message box. We just want to lighten up the room a little bit as we get into the conversation proper. So we'll be looking forward to some interesting songs. Maybe if I'm missing out or anything that I need to catch up on, through your suggestions in there, I can find something there. So, in just a minute, a few seconds, you can just drop what you're listening to in there. Okay, so I see Injalo Injalo by Credo and then Daniels. A South African song. Okay, okay. I'm not sure I've heard it. Would definitely look it up. Someone is saying Kofi Kinata for nothing. Okay, that's cool. Any other cool song that obviously Kakalika had to make the list. That's cool. Any other before we get into the conversation? Pop star. All right, Black Sherif. That's cool. So it's interesting that whichever song you put out there, I mean, it definitely tells something, which I think we would unpack by the end of the conversation. So I see Scout by Joe Mood. And there is also another suggestion saying someone's revisited Blonde. I'm revisiting Blonde by Frank Ocean. Okay. Sacrifice Black Sheriff. So this is the second time Black Sheriff is featuring in there. Kofi, if that says something, I mean, Blackway is also still dominating here. Makola Dreams, yeah, Omar Stalin and Manifest. That's fine. So that was just cool thing to know. I mean, I'm not missing out on much. I think a couple of the songs in that on my playlist as well. So that is fine. Today, as we all know, we are talking about culture as data and how brands can decode this to stay relevant and globally competitive. And whenever you hear about data, you would most likely be hearing things around dashboards, numbers, analytics, and all that, which are all very relevant. But we want to take the conversation up a notch a little bit to look at what brands of today or brands are doing to stay relevant. And one of the key things that rest assured they are doing is that they are also looking at how people are communicating, how people are behaving, what people are saying, and how they're expressing their identity. So that is what we are going to unpack today. And exactly the how. I mean, you shouldn't leave this conversation not knowing what exactly to do and how exactly to go about it. So joined us today, we have two gurus I would say when it comes to brand development, when it comes to strategy, when it comes to culture and research. And I would let them quickly introduce themselves and then we can get into the conversation. So welcome once again. If anyone needs to be in this room and is not, kindly drop a reminder for the person to join. Hi Mike, how are you doing?
Hey, 𝐂𝐮𝐿, how's it going?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I mean, been looking forward to this day for the most part, so glad we are finally here. How's it going at your end?
Yeah, good. Thanks, man. I'm here in London. It's like the first day in quite a while that isn't freezing. So, kind of enjoying finally the start of this London summer after what felt like endless misery.
Right. Are you hearing the cheers from the Arsenal fans? Because I mean, not like, and if there's any Arsenal fan on the call, I mean, congrats. I mean, it's been a journey. So,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
yeah.
It's funny, like I live in South London, so I'm a lot closer to
Oh,
like
okay.
Millwall. So I think I'm hearing like more tears in the streets, but absolutely a beautiful day for Arsenal supporters the world over.
Right. That's fine. Kofi, how are you doing? What's up with you?
Well, I'm having an absolutely horrid time because I'm a Manchester United supporter, so it's very painful seeing seeing all these celebrations. But apart from that, I'm pretty good. Really excited to be here, and really looking forward to a great conversation as well.
All right. Thanks for agreeing to be part of this. Mike, I think the very first session will be led by you. When we are talking about culture, what exactly are we looking at? Why is it even relevant for us to look at such a conversation today? And then, yeah, I think if you have any insights on that, you would go. Before Mike goes, a little housekeeping rules. Um, Mike will be having the first presentation, and then after. If you have any questions, I mean, you can drop them in the message box. We will definitely read them out so that we can provide insights. After Mike's session, there'll be a quick roundup as to what exactly was talked about. And then Kofi will pick up the final session, which from there will be a Q&A session so that whatever you want to know, whatever you want to ask, you can feel free and put it across. So thanks, Mike. Thank you, can move.
𝐂𝐮𝐿, thank you so much. So, I'm Mike Laws. I'm the lead researcher and strategist at Ask One Question. Ask One Question is a research and design practice based in Barcelona and London. And what we do is we do deep qualitative research for brands, organizations, municipalities, leaders. And when I say deep, I mean like deep. The groups of people that we will work with, that we will interview, will normally be quite small, 10 to maybe 20 people, but we'll spend 30, 40 plus hours per person, really getting inside of their heads, really getting inside of their worlds, really trying to understand what life is like for them. And often when I have to describe what I do to people, I joke that I'm like a commercial anthropologist whose job it is to observe and analyze culture and turn it into usable data for companies. So when you say how can brands decode culture to stay relevant and globally competitive, I guess that's a question we're trying to answer every day. Just want to check, am I coming through clear on sound, visuals all right? Am I all good technically?
Yeah, all good.
Excellent. Okay, so today I want to do really three things. I'm going to talk a little bit about data, like what do we mean when we talk about data, and what is kind of our philosophy on that, and what I think is interesting. I'm going to talk a little bit about culture, and then I'm going to do a little bit of a how-to, like talk about how we do our job. There's a whole little section I have on about like cross-market research. But I think it might be a bit too much, so I might try save that for the Q&A or a part two if I'm so kind. Or rather, if you guys are so kind to invite me back for a round two. But anyway, before we jump into the meat of it, let me start with a little story. Um, One of our clients is a major content streaming platform. And they have, amongst other things, a huge data team, a big data team that spends, hundreds of hours every week just poring over the clicks and trying to look at all the analytics to work out what is happening in their audience, to work out where the kind of rivers of culture are moving. And 2 years ago, we got this really interesting call out of the blue. They said to us, look, we've identified this really weird group of people. They seem to be consistently like 2 or 3 years ahead of culture. Like they keep finding these creators, they keep finding the content that only will blow up in like 2 or 3 years' time. And it's like, we need to know who these people are. They obviously are very influential. They must be like very influential people. And so we need to be in contact with them. But what was really interesting was that despite all the messaging they were trying to do to reach these people, just nothing was working. Like they weren't landing at all. And so they were like, cool, we're going to reach out to Ask One Question to get in contact with them and go and find out who these people are. And again, like keeping in mind, their theory was that because these people were so ahead of culture, they were like, wow, these must be like real cultural insiders. They must be people who are very socially networked and like fashion and culture and magazines. They must have huge followings, like they must have a lot of clout. And then what we found actually was when we went to go hang out with them was the exact opposite. This photo that I've put up here is a bedroom from one of the people that we interviewed. She lives in the American Midwest, in the middle of nowhere. Like much of the group that we interviewed, she was someone who was in many ways like the very definition of a cultural outsider. She was very isolated from her community, like kind of had a real cultural clash with the kind of deep MAGA America around her. Was by no means like kind of on the insider track of any kind of big social network, and really had no following to speak of. But what we found out when we were hanging out with her was that her, like much of the people in this group, or like all the people in this group, because they were so isolated, they were spending an enormous amount of time online. And while they were online, they were really like digging through the mud of the internet to find gold, like to find these incredible pieces of culture that no one else was seeing yet, but then would probably blow up in a couple of years. We also found out something else about them that we didn't expect. Our client didn't expect at all, and they didn't even think was that important. But it really was like the hook by which their little gold finding would then leak in and become this really big, downstream influence on culture. And, for all of our clients, every time we go and do research in the field, we almost always go, after spending some time interviewing someone, we go into their bedroom, because this is often the little realm that someone has control over. It's the one place that they're going to place all these little cultural artifacts that kind of represent who they are, what they like, what they're feeling, what they think about. And in a very kind of interesting way, you can find out so much about like someone's soul, so to speak, by like what they have on the walls of their bedroom. Like, what is the culture that they're most connecting with? Now, unfortunately, due to the nature of the NDA, I can't tell you exactly what was the secret mechanism by which this culture that they were finding was being hooked out into mainstream culture. But what I can say was that what I love about this story is that, like, despite this enormous company having pretty much some of the best big data, quantitative data you can have, like the best dashboards in the world, they were able to see that this phenomena was happening, but they weren't able to understand why it was happening. And because they weren't able to understand the why, they really weren't able to speak with them or kind of work with them strategically. And that is very much like the work that we do at Ask One Question. And I think certainly when someone says culture as data, the type of data that they're talking about. Now, let's take a second here to say the obvious. There really are two types of data. There's quantitative data, which is like numbers, metrics, analytics, and there's qualitative data, which is often where culture lives. What we know is that like modern business runs on big data. Like every major brand has a data analytics team. They're running the numbers. They're tracking every click. They're looking at every email that gets opened. I like to laugh that in the next hour, like the world's top 100 companies will probably have more data than like the first 3,000 years of commerce. Like we're really in a time of like an abundance of data. And yet there's kind of a paradox here that like, despite all this data, so much stuff sucks. Like so much advertising is terrible. So much comms is irritating. So many meaningless brand campaigns, so many awful so many terrible products get put into the world. And so there's kind of this like, this like strange contradiction that like there's this like abundance of data and a scarcity of like meaningful stuff. And our feeling is that like part of the problem is that if you're only using quantitative data, it can create the illusion of intimacy with a world, but actually what it can hide is a complete lack of direct understanding with the reality of the customers or the consumers you want to connect with. I don't want to reinvent the wheel. We all stand on the shoulders of giants. And one such giant is a woman called Trisha Wang. She was a qualitative researcher at Nokia. She put out a paper in 2013, just as Nokia was beginning its slow descent into the sewage. And she told about her story of how like Nokia had this big data, engine that it used, and yet it missed what her and all of her qualitative colleagues have been saying for ages, was that through their research, they were seeing that like lower and middle income consumers were ready for smartphones. And yet Nokia kept saying like, yeah, we're not sure about that. And she has this really great extended quote, which is just talking about how Nokia, despite all of this qualitative research, just said, well, we can't really see it in our big quant data. But the line that she came up with is what is measurable isn't the same as what is valuable. And I love this. I think it's such a brilliant insight about life and about business in particular and about working with brands. The difficulty with quantitative data is that even though it might give you a great sense of scale and therefore like, accuracy once you get it right, in order to make that quantitative data, you have to strip it of culture. You have to strip it of context. You have to strip it of the texture, like the look and feel and delicious spiciness that kind of makes up human life. And of course, you also have to like strip out outliers. If you have a data set and you have one random person with a weird view thing, that a lot of data science will be like, you have to cut that from the mean. And this is where kind of qualitative data comes in with its real belief in the value of culture, which is to try and reintroduce all these things, to reintroduce context, to reintroduce texture, and most importantly, to actually reintroduce outliers. She points out that there's really like three strong arguments for qualitative data. The first she says is it uncovers hidden shifts before they fully criticize. She says if you're going to map unknown territory, where you don't know what you don't know, the best way to find this out is just to like go and speak to people, like to go and really listen and be curious. Because, long before something often comes up in the quantitative data, people are still working that out for themselves. And if you kind of listen in carefully enough, you can solve this problem of like not knowing what you don't know. The second really is about like context. If you have quantitative data stripping out all this content, what you also lose is like an understanding of the underlying conditions that created that phenomena, right? If you think about something, let's say, that's a lot more easy in like economics, right? Like if you notice that the price of wheat has gone up, that's very useful. But unless you know why the price of wheat has gone up, like, oh, there's war in Ukraine, or the Suez Canal is blocked, or there's new trade sanctions, like unless you know the underlying reason for why something has changed, you're not going to be able to create meaningful strategy in response to it. And that is what qualitative data is so good at is like by understanding the context that gave rise to something, whether it's like someone's feelings or whatever it is, you're able to kind of get that underlying condition clear and therefore make strategy. An example of this in our work is we've been pitching for a client that does a very good secondhand selling platform. And like the reason why people might be engaging with secondhand goods, for one person, it might be sustainability, but for another person, it might be like luxury, that these are like vintage goods that you can't buy anymore. And the way that you message to these people is obviously like fundamentally differently. So, again, what you lose with quant, you can kind of recover with qual, which is understanding of context. And then finally, it is in this kind of qualitative data that you can see the culture in which people are existing and therefore have the texture for storytelling. At some level, all business is storytelling, right? And this is especially true for our clients, so normally brand managers or CMOs. And while quantitative data can show this big picture, it leaves out the language, the emotion, the mood that is necessary for effective storytelling. I think all in all, this is to say that while quantitative data is extremely important and has its place, you lose this really firm grip on circumstance, texture, and these hidden things that are emerging. And this is what qualitative data, just going out and speaking to people, really tries to reintroduce back into the equation. That being the case, let's talk about culture. I mean, there's lots of ways of doing ethnography, right? There's lots of ways of doing qualitative data. But for us, ask one question, we take culture very seriously. And when I say culture, I don't mean traditional culture, like folklore or religion or family structure, all which is very valid, very important. But what I mean is like contemporary culture, popular culture, music, fashion, film, social media, memes, aesthetics, fandom, gaming, sports, even anything that like a 14 to 50-year-old will keep themselves busy with when they have nothing to do. That's what I mean by like contemporary culture. And, for us, we try to treat culture as both a means to opening up conversation with people. Like, can I build an interview around someone's love of a particular artist or particular aesthetic or look? But we also use it as evidence in itself. Like for our clients, we often build media ecosystems to show them the kind of cultural worlds that clients are living in. We'll scan 3D artifacts and make them digital so that like clients can look and feel what like a particular item of merch looks like. We'll take posters off of walls. We'll spend an enormous time trying to like really showcase the culture that people surround themselves with. And sometimes people are really surprised by this. They're like, well, why would you do that? Like, all of that stuff is so trivial. Like, why does what you listen to maybe, have such an insight into people's lives? And our answer here is that like culture is really the means by which like beliefs, moods, behavior, and identity, particularly the changes in those things, where they first emerge, where they also like harden, like where they kind of become fixed, and then where they become like visible to other people. I want to use a quote here from another kind of thought leader in the space, Christopher Wiley. Christopher Wiley is a very controversial figure. He was one of the founders of Cambridge Analytica. They were the political intelligence agency that got Brexit to happen in the UK, which I personally am not thrilled about. So even though I might disagree with him politically, there's no doubt that he's like a true genius when it comes to understanding how culture and politics intersect. And what's interesting is that he'd done a PhD literally in fashion and what it means for data. And I think now is the head of research at H&M. But he said this quote talking about political extremism and how like you can see political changes happen first in culture. He said, when a society jerks into extremism, so does its fashion. Think about Maoists, Nazis, Klansmen, and jihadists. What do they all have in common? A look. Extremism starts with how people look and how society feels. Sometimes it creates literal uniforms, and he gives some examples. like MAGA hats and polo shirts and red armbands. He says these uniforms are incorporated into the wearer's identity, transforming their thinking from this is what I believe into this is who I am. And this is something that we see time and time again, in our work, is that people are feeling their inner selves, they're feeling their inner worlds. And the way they externalize that is through culture, whether it's through fashion choices or music choices. And that is often also what kind of like fixes it. Like a temporary floating feeling or belief might become part of that person's identity once they start to build culture around them. And so as much as you can understand that people are building their identities through culture, the other side of that is that if you can decode culture, you can therefore decode what is happening in their internal world. An example of this I've been thinking a lot about recently is like trad wives in America. I'm not sure if anyone's seen this. Let me see if I can find a photo like to share quickly with the group. Give me a moment here. But effectively, like trad wives are young millennial and Gen Z women who are dressing up like 1950s housewives from America. And part of this is like a conservative backlash against, feminism and more progressive values. And so on the one hand, what's really interesting is if you like look at their content, you can see a lot of this kind of nostalgia for like a very conservative old school way of thinking about gender. And yet, if you actually look at also like the way that they live, there's also something very contemporary and modern about it. They're getting Botox, they're going to Pilates, they're not eating gluten. Like as much as they are like throwing back to this 1950s, they're also doing things that like a 1950s housewife would never have done ever in her whole life. And I love this kind of tension that you can see just there, even in the way that they look, between like the attempt at like a 1950s nostalgia in the dress with like the thick lip fillers kind of indicating the modern pressure of like beauty performance. And so even without interviewing someone yet, you can already see a sight of tension in their world between like a contemporary standard of beauty versus like a 1950s desire to like signal what kind of cultural value you ascribe to. So yeah, that is effectively why we are big believers in this idea that like it makes sense for brands to take culture seriously, because if you're able to do so, not only can you like really understand the psychological world of your clients, but you can also like kind of anticipate maybe where the market is going and where changes are going. The next section I'd normally would love to share, this is what I'm gonna have to skip, is about like, what does this mean when you're working across various markets, not just in, let's say America and the UK, but we also do a lot of work in Latin America. We do work in East Asia, and we also sometimes do work in Sub-Saharan Africa. And maybe I can return to later, like what does it mean to work cross jurisdiction? But I would for now just like to maybe talk about like if this is the theory, then like how do you go and do it? Effectively, we have like a 5-step process. We start with listening in, we move to interviewing one-on-one, we go into the field, we analyze, and then we test. Let me tell you what that means. So before we speak to anyone, the first thing we do is like go online and sometimes really dig to find like where are the people that our client is interested in, where are they hanging out online. Sometimes we go and do it in real life too. We'll like go to a particular mall or a particular space and just like listen, like look at the memes they're posting, look at the comments that people are writing. I always joke that like an actual part of my job is sometimes just to read through the YouTube comment section for hours, like looking for that one comment that is like, oh my God, this is fascinating. This person is really saying something weird. So that is often like the first port of call for us, is just going online and sitting and listening for hours. After we've done that, we'll start to build together, I can't even say like a thesis, but like references, like an understanding that like this is part of the culture and world that makes up someone's life. Then we'll go and do one-on-one interviews. And normally what we do is it's a weird mix of trying to understand the exact theme or topic that the client is interested in while weaving in the cultural references we think this person inhabits and try work out what resonates with them, what doesn't, what are we missing, what have we got, and start to kind of build out this picture. So we interview one people, we'll do this 10, 15, 20 times. After that kind of one-on-one, often on Zoom or Google Meet interviews, we'll go into the field. This is when we go into their house. This is when we hang out with their friends. Sometimes we go with them to work. Sometimes we'll go with them to a mall or to a sporting event. But like really put ourselves into their worlds to like really understand what day-to-day life looks like for them. And what does it just feel like to move through their lives? Finally, we go back and we analyze. And what we do is we really look for like three big things, which is saturation, contradiction, and energy. So saturation is like, is the same thing coming up multiple times? So like if we interview 10 people and 6 people are talking about how stressful they find being on their phone all the time, that is like a signal that is saturated. But if just one person talks about it, there's like not enough saturation for it to be meaningful. So the first thing we look for is saturation. The second thing that we really love is contradiction. So if people say, oh, I like X, but then something about their energy or something about their lives shows that they actually are anti-X, that is always very rich for us. Like, why is there this contradiction here? And then finally, energy. Like the things that get people super excited, like get people really gassed up, that is often a sign that like there's something really culturally interesting there. So somewhere between these three of saturation, contradiction, and energy, we are able to like pull together a prediction of where we think, or rather an analysis of where we think culture is going. And then finally, we will go out and test it. We will come up with a theory and then bring it back to the people we've interviewed and say, like, well, what do you think? And sometimes we're way off and they correct us. And sometimes they're like, I really like this. And what about this? So that last bit of testing with the very people you've interviewed is also really critical. So that is me for now. I just want to kind of end on a final bit about like curiosity. Like, obviously, a huge part of our work is being curious about people's lives, being curious about the culture that they consume and that they create. And our belief is that like curiosity is like totally necessary for good strategy. But I think more than like curiosity as a form of like strategy making, I think curiosity is good for user experience. I think curiosity is good for customer journey. Like people are so used to being spoken at, like targeted with emails or like having stuff pushed to them. It's like we're not in conversation, like we're just like constantly being spoken at, and it's kind of exhausting. And often when we engage with clients, when we engage with the young people we interview, like so often they're just like, oh my God, thank you for coming to talk with me. Like, I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful I could have been listened to. Like, I'm really grateful I had an opportunity to like talk about something that I like or don't like. And that's had a big impression on me that like, there's something about like curiosity, not just a way of coming up with strategy, but a way of like building relationships with customers that I think is like totally missing and like really essential to like the marketplace going forward. And while I'm not necessarily optimistic about I can see a timeline in which like we are freed up to do more of the like face-to-face human work. And to that end, I say like cultures data like may she bloom, like especially the like human face-to-face culture. So yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. I think you really set the ball rolling, and I like the part where you mentioned a point about the illusion of intimacy, right? Because sometimes you may be behind your screens or you may be in boardrooms thinking that your brand is really doing well on the ground, or thinking that people are having so much of what you're putting out there. But it is only when you roll up your sleeves to get to the field that you get to understand what's really happening. Typical example would be that you can see a post on, let's say, Instagram with about 1,000 likes or 700 likes and no comment. And you wonder that are they like how are they showing interest or how are you going to measure the interest beyond the likes or beyond the analytics that the Instagram app or any social media analytics tool you are using going to make known. So I think it's a very good conversation that we are having here today that hey, to really understand what your people are talking about, your prospective clients, your consumers. I mean, it's only a matter of necessity to also get into spaces where they find themselves and all that. So thanks so much, Mike, for that insight. Um, a few questions in here. I think if you do have a question or two, this is not the main Q&A session though, but I just want to pick up one or two questions and then we can move into Kofi's session, which will be the final session. And I see in the comment box, Sterling mentions qualitative data is always richer, which is good. I think Mike made that point that quantitative data gives you the idea of the scale, gives you idea of the big picture, but to understand the nuances, the emotions, the texture, and all that, you'd have to definitely look at the qualitative side of things or what people are saying and doing. Um, if there are no questions at this point, I think Kofi, you would have your session. I think you've been doing okay. We have Sterling. I think yeah, you can go on with your question.
Oh, okay. If it wouldn't be a problem, I could hold on till the Q&A session.
Okay, that's
Okay.
that's that's also fine. So that yeah, we
Okay.
would have enough time for the Q&A. That's
Yeah.
that's cool. So Kofi Turkson, do I need to introduce you or you just go ahead?
Oh, I'll just go
But yeah,
ahead.
I mean Kofi is doing amazing, is doing amazing work when it comes to culture, strategy, and brand. And Kofi, what's your take so far about culture as data, how brands can decode this? I think Mike has extensively talked about what he's doing with Ask One Question.
Mhm.
How is it going with you, my Runway Group? How are you also finding relevance in the culture space?
Okay. First of all, big ups to Mike. Really enjoyed the session. Learned quite a lot. Um, Definitely be taking some notes home and be utilizing it. On our end, it's been the last couple of years, or let's say the last 5, 6 years, have been really interesting. As brands and even individuals start to understand the value of data and yeah, and even like just how that even relates to culture and all that. What we've seen, what that has caused is you see nowadays a lot of brands getting bolder, a lot of brands sort of finding their identity, a lot of brands sort of finding their voice, especially, I'm just going to speak on African brands because primarily what we do is provide opportunities for African brands on a global scale. So sort of integrating African brands uh, into global communities or global settings. So ideally, one of the things that we've learned, or one of the things that we found to be quite paramount is like the importance of owning your culture and the importance of owning the data around that. Because ideally, one of the things that we've noticed is, um, and I love what Mike is doing because it also, let me go a little dark right now. One of the biggest problems the continent has is data, right? It's 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 a mining ground for tons of data when you're looking at different sectors and all that. There's just so much richness. And one of the things that you realize is because of that, it makes it difficult for us to learn from mistakes. It makes it difficult for us to even be a little more strategic. I think in the last couple of years, we have made great strides in sort of changing that. And a big shout to organizations like Brand Up or Sculptor, who are doing great things in that field, um, using cultural insights to make strategic decisions, right? I feel that is very important. The importance of sort of claiming that ownership, and we see it across different fields. We see it across fashion, we see it across music. I work primarily in the creative industry, where this is it's a very tricky conversation to have, right? Especially um, throwing a question to the group, who owns culture? Like when it comes to who owns it, like who has the right to use it? These are all questions. I mean, and you would have two sides of arguments, and both of them can make cases that make complete sense, right? So it's sort of, I think we are at, did I lose you? Okay. I think we're at a point where we need more conversations like this because it sort of provides the foundation for growth, right? And ideally, we do see that a lot with what we do, like taking African businesses and just sort of throwing them into the wild. Uh, you do have cases where some brands try and struggle to stay afloat because they get all of a sudden you are introduced to like you're in the middle of the ocean and you sort of try absorbing everything else, try picking up from everything else, trying to make sure that you fit in, right? But most of the times, what we don't understand is what we own, right? That's the distinguishing factor between us and I say the rest of the world. Before I think I'm yapping at this point, so I'm just going to go straight to the slides. And yeah, let me jump
Yes,
straight into it. Because I think if you leave me, I can end up talking the whole day.
yeah. I mean, from the way you've started, I can tell. But yeah, I mean, good start.
All right, let me go right here. Let's put that. Okay. All right. So once again, thanks for giving me the opportunity to be here. This is a topic that I'm really excited to speak on, especially because it's uh, it's conversations I have every day, right? Especially when you're working between markets. It's what distinguishes you because, as I said earlier, we provide platforms for African brands. And well, the world is a ruthless place, and a lot of times it's how do you prepare, right? How do you stay globally competitive? How do you prepare to be in that space where you could hold your weight, even when it comes to uh, competing against brands that are three, four, five, 10, 100 times more powerful than you, right? So from our perspective, and this is based on conversations we have had across people in the music industries, people in even business people who designers, right? And a lot of them have always felt that, okay, when it comes to, they're doing pretty great. And when it comes to, for lack of a better word, attempting global dominance, they look at blending in. And these are, I mean, these are things that people have actually said to us. Sorry, I had a call which was quite distracting. Okay, so I mean, we're having a conversation with a fashion brand who was told like, make it universal. Another person was like, stand down your identity so that you can appeal to more people and all those things. And what we've realized, I mean, looking in hindsight, because they always say hindsight is 2020, right? In the end, a lot of brands start out as very distinctive, as memorable, and all of a sudden, they are in new markets, and you sort of see, should I say, a rebrand, right? They start doing things differently, trying to adapt to new markets. Now, I'm not saying adapting to new markets is a bad idea, but sometimes that thing that makes your brand special, that USP, you hold on to it and you take it as far as you can go. It Culture is not a stairway that takes you to where you need to be. I mean, it is not that thing that, okay, I'm going to own my culture. I'm going to do something that's culturally relevant. And the moment I'm on a global scale, I'm now going to do what everyone is doing, right? It's not that way. It is, and we've seen it across boards. We've seen, and let me even be, should I say, looking for the exact words. We've seen a lot of brands that have stuck to their cultural values, and cultural values aren't always, you're not talking about what do you call it, motifs and all those things that are African, or the African music and all those things. Culture by its definition means a lot, right? And I'll have more of a controversial take that in as much as the society has its construct of culture as individuals and as businesses, we also have our own construct of culture as well, which we have to own. So what we realized is a lot of times the brands that we've seen like go all the way through have sort of stuck to what made them great in the first place, right? And we've had occasions where, for example, I'm not also going to put any names there, but we were, I think about 3 or 4 years ago, we were able to stock a couple of African brands in a couple of department stores in the UK, Sephora, Anthropology. And what we saw, right, over time is a lot of brands started, okay, changing all of a sudden, like sort of tweaking things. Like once they got in, like, okay, the first year, things are going great. Now, what we realized was there was one brand that sort of stuck to their core offering, right? Instead of, I think as business owners, a lot of us, once a big opportunity comes, we tend to start to overthink. And okay, now I'm getting into the UK market. That means I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to do this. And a lot of times where that overthinking leads you is to a point where you're at an end point that is nothing close to what you actually had from the very beginning, right? But so there were some brands that came and it totally looked different from what uh, we had been seeing. And then there were some other brands that stuck to their roots and they kept selling out. Like one brand sold out in a week, had to reorder and all those things. And years later, they sort of stuck to what they own, the storytelling aspect of it, owning their story and sort of not tweaking it. So ideally, I think I'm even moving ahead of my slides. But all of us have sort of had interactions on global levels. We've had interactions with people outside of like traditional sense of culture and all that. But there are three questions that I just want to throw at everyone. And it's like, when did you last pay for something because of where it came from? Which competitor could you never copy? Not because of budget, but because you simply aren't them. And when did a customer describe your product or a service in a way that surprised you? And I think these are questions that I just want you to ponder on. Um, and this is based on experiences that we see when organizations or brands are trying to level up culturally. A lot of times, the reason why you are being sought after is not because you're doing everything, something everyone is doing, but it's because you have that one thing that other brands don't do. Now, there's a lot of there's a big debate when it comes to optimizing your product or your service, especially when you are growing as a company, or you're growing as a brand, or you're growing as a company, right? How much of optimization is giving away your, should I say, and I'm going to use the word culture loosely here. How much of it is? So a lot of times, the question is sticking to what makes you unique, but finding ways of optimizing it and making it better, not sort of giving it away. Now you have something that sells. You could be, and this doesn't just come to product, it comes to services as well. You could be a graphic designer. You have a distinctive way of looking at the world. Now you're working with global brands, and all of a sudden, it's those things that inspire you. All of a sudden, don't feel you sort of feel that they're the ones sort of keeping you in a box, right? But and I think Kwabna, you guys do a lot of great designs, so I'll put this to you. But a lot of times, those designs you've always drawn inspiration from are the ones that have you creating something for like a global company, and it's very different from what every else would be like. It is like you have a wholly different source of inspiration, which makes you stand out from the rest, right? It could be a brief that's given to 20 people. Now, all of us are shaped by our experiences. Now, that brief, we will all look at it different ways. Now, it's about how do you fulfill that brief while also staying true to your principles, to what literally has you, what literally has brought you to that point, right? So I think it's very funny because I heard Mike say something similar, but culture is not what you celebrate on national holidays. It's ideally how you make decisions without being taught to. It's how customers value that thing that no survey tells you. It's how people in your market market. It's different elements. It's what you refuse to compromise on. And also it's that one thing that makes people say, hey, where did this come from? Like where did this idea come from? Where did this come from? It's what sets you apart from everyone else. And that is something that a lot of businesses don't seem to, let me not say don't seem to, it's a lot of businesses that don't seem to leverage, right? Now, as businesses, one thing you should all realize is you are sitting on tons of data. No one knows your customer more than you. It's the data you have as a business is something that people would actually pay for, right? And it's about, and that goes back to the point about, and I'm really glad Mike spoke on it. How do you actually like collect that data? Because a lot of times, a lot of us feel that if I'm going to analyze this, and then I'm going to probably have to outsource to research agency or all those things. Now, that is great, but there are ways that as you move along, you could actually take control of your data as well. So this is just a little pep talky thing because a lot of times when it comes to the sentiment, when it comes to organizations or brands getting into the global spaces, oh, like especially with the African brands that we work with, is a lot of them seem to feel left behind because it's like, oh, like, okay, we don't have the technology, we don't have the skill set to compete. You do, and even we've been running this fashion accelerator, and we had which is aimed at sort of getting these brands into the UK market. And one of the, I think 2 weeks ago, someone made this, it's not funny, but an interesting statement about how a lot of them, and this was about like the tie and dye, right? So this was a Ghanaian designer who sort of pays homage to his hometown. So he has very distinct, like, should I say, products based on his experiences growing up. And ideally, he was talking about his friend who had like sort of owned her space and literally just woken up one day and she had about 15, 16 messages in her Instagram. Literally people showing her a design on Shein, which was literally a rip-off, right? Which was literally just a copycat and all that. And Heifer was like, as an African brand, I do not have the ability to compete, right? They could literally just keep taking ideas and all those things, and I do not have the capacity to compete. I do not, even in terms of innovation. But the truth is, there's a reason why, and not to even sound spiritual or something, but when it comes to especially the creative arts and all that, you do feel a lot of people say they feel what they have has soul, not in the literal sense of the way, but there is something that connects a designer or that connects a designer, that this connects a musician to their craft or to what they create. Or even when it comes to brands, there is something, there is, there's a link between you as a person and what you produce, which has a lot of ties when it whether it comes back to whether it goes back to like your experiences or the way you think, there is that connection, right? And in as much as that could be replicated on a surface level, and that's why we even advocate a lot for storytelling. A lot of times, just having your product just is just not enough. There's a story behind that a lot of times, and even this just doesn't apply to products. A lot of times, what we find out, the mistake we end up having is creating something and think it's going to tell its own story. But what we've learned recently is storytelling is as important as what you're creating. Because if you don't tell the story, there's a reason why people identify with you, like people identify with your brand. Now, Sculptor was, I mean, was born out of a purpose, was born out of inspiration. Like, so how do you also work hand in hand, in as much as you are focusing on what you are producing or selling or putting out in the world? How do you also own the storytelling around that? And that's why you see, I think, in recent times, you have seen a lot of businesses, organizations, just and brands be more focused on like the storytelling aspect of it as well, because it's something that we tend to, should I say, it's something that we tend to underplay. And I think it's also come up in conversations, and excuse me, I've had tons of interesting conversations. So sometimes I'm just talking and one pops up. But this was from a brand that felt like was being advised, okay, spend more time telling your story and all that. And he's like, I do not have time to be telling stories. Like, I have a business to run. I don't have time to be telling stories, right? But something should teach you. I think there's something that we all learn from big brands, like global brands. In as much as a Nike or an Adidas have that brand dominance and they could just sell, 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 you look at how much emphasis these big brands put on their storytelling, right? And that is something that even like smaller brands like us should look up to. Because if these big brands recognize the value of storytelling, and even with times how they tie it to specific things, like ideally, you have, I think there was this uh, London Marathon ad I saw, and it even tied it into like, it's an ad for shoes. Why are we talking about the history of London and all those things? But you do realize that when it comes to storytelling or when it comes to brands, a lot more goes into your brand than just what you're selling. There are tons of ties, and it's up to you to be able to bring in all those elements and speak something that is true to you, but also something that people can relate to and say, hey, like, I really like what this person is saying. I really understand what this person is saying. Because in as much as we are different people, at the core, we're pretty much, there are some ties that bind us. And so when it comes back to staying globally relevant and globally competitive and culturally relevant. Going back to three questions, especially when it comes to your brand, what can be copied? What have you missed? And who already trusts you? And ideally, every business, as I was saying earlier, every business has something irreplaceable in its DNA. And I'm pretty sure there are a lot of businesses here. And obviously, there's something that sets you apart from the next one. I haven't met two different people who say our businesses are exactly the same, right? Now, a lot of times, what businesses get wrong is trying to, and that's it, like trying to cast a wider net instead of staying to like, and ideally, what even means is in terms of like even brand language and all those things, it ends up getting very generic, right? Instead of then again, you're like every brand talk. So if you're selling shoes, it's like you're like 40% your language, your ads, it's like 40% of what's there globally. It's you literally, and I think you in a way, you sort of see it nowadays with some brands. You could see one brand and you scroll later and you come across another brand and you really can't tell the difference. Just because, I mean, right now we have, I mean, AI and all those things, which is really great, but it's also when you're trying to cast a wide net, it's also very easy to get lost in the crowd because you're trying to uh, tell a story everyone can identify it. I mean, there's this thing that I learned pretty early. You can't have a business that's for everyone. Like, you can't have a business that speaks to everyone. That is literally impossible. Even when it comes to it's just impossible. So ideally, with brands looking at just staying globally, culturally relevant and globally competitive, hiding what makes you specific to appeal to everyone is a big mistake, right? Stay true to what you are. And a lot of us can think about a lot of local brands or a lot of brands on the continent that have gained like global recognition, because not because they sort of fit in, but because they were able to stick to what they know. Please let me know if I'm going overboard with time as well. I'll try and speed this up. But
Yeah. I think a few more minutes. I think less than five
okay,
minutes
all
to
right. So
go.
I'm almost done by the way.
Right.
So ideally for effective brands, a lot of times lead with the things that can be replicated, your specific knowledge, your community, your market perspectives. Ideally, it's also very important to interact with your audience as well. Make Create products that, and also feedback is very important as well. But also in sticking to your core and optimizing what you're offering, make people ask that question like, and that cuts across whether it's design and all those things. Make people question like, what inspires this person? I wonder what they were thinking when they thought of this. I wonder what they were thinking when they created things. And ideally, a lot of times, what you realize is it unlocks more value for what you actually create or what you produce, because that thing that distinguishes you, that's where all the value lies. So uh instead of thinking of how do I make more money by selling more and just watering down my product to appeal to more people, sometimes look at the flip side and say, how do I make my product or service so special that people are willing to pay extra for it? Now, sorry. All right. So a lot of times what businesses also get wrong is designing product and services for use cases only planned, right? And one thing about research is a lot of times it tells you, um, it shows you, and maybe Mike might argue with me over that know you're a lot more well-versed in this, but it's a lot of times it shows you what customers want, right? But there are a lot of cases where it doesn't show you what customers do, right? In as much as you're diving into the lives, but I do know that with what do you call it? Um, Qualitative studies, you are able to get a lot more data. But one of the things that you should look at is for what you make, especially when you're looking at a global scale, um, in as much as creating things that are relevant to sort of unlock that, should I say, to sort of unlock that, should I say, quality? Yeah. To, sorry, I've lost my chain of thought trying to skip. But ideally, what I meant was keeping as in as much as you're sticking to the core, also try and think about your customer, right? In as much as you're creating a business, also try and anticipate their needs. And also it's a fine balance, right? It's balancing between what you believe in and what you're creating, and also seeing how it suits the needs of the people that you're serving. So ideally, one thing we've realized, and this is, should I say, low-hanging fruit for a lot of African brands that are looking to get in there globally, is at its core, globally, you always have a core group of people that trust you, that you speak to, right? And it's about how do you build communities around that. Now, one easy way a lot of African brands that I've realized do is building across around diasporas, right? Now, ideally, you are making the customers in different markets your evangelist, but it's always a starting point. It's always scary when you're looking at getting into new markets, and first of all, you do not really have that data which shows, okay, how are people going to respond to my product or respond to my service? And a lot of times what that means is you have a lot of people just throwing money at the situation. Okay, so you have like cold customer acquisition, which on paper always feels like it's a really great idea. But obviously, when you're looking at longevity, when you're looking at actually connecting to people, it is a lot of times it's being very intentional about how you activate and how you build awareness from scratch, and how, back to the storytelling, how you tell your story, and obviously mapping your networks uh, before mapping your target market. As I said, who do you know? Who do you know professionally, culturally? Who can you connect with? Whose story can you resonate with? Because the truth is, for people you can relate with, a lot of times it is easier to understand the market they're in by just sort of that two-way exchange. I always say brands and consumers, it's always a two-way exchange between them. And ideally, what that helps you do is sort of market entry without a full market entry budget. Because you know that lately, those budgets, the budget cuts, we just have to be a lot more mindful about how we spend money. Just because on our scale, it's like once you're looking at uh, getting into global markets, a lot of times, a lot of people think that that requires like big mega budgets. But what a lot of brands have proven time and time again, is a lot of times it's not the biggest budget that wins. It's the person that is able to stay true to that unique product or service they have and connect with people authentically and organically. So this is just ways a lot of, and this is just from conversations we've had when it comes to cultural trust and data. It's a lot of times three main ways that we've realized that companies sort of lose the plot is extracting. I mean, culture is not something that you feel it could be extracting. Over the years, you have seen a lot of backlash over companies that sort of tap in without understanding. It's like, how do we extract this and we sort of use it to grow? But using cultural markers as surface decoration without that substance behind them, it's always easy to tell like what companies are, what brands are doing it because it's culturally hot, like it's the hot thing at the moment, or what brands are doing things because they understand or they they know or they value the story they're bringing to a global audience. A lot of times, too, I'm just going to go through this quickly. A lot of times, too, we have seen a lot of performative campaigns or performative ways of trying to connect with audience. And ideally, customers are in fools. You might get away for like, okay, the first year, but when you're looking at long-term longevity, if performative action never takes you all the way, I mean, I stand to be corrected. But what you do realize is if you look at companies that have stayed at the top of their game for the last 20, 30, which have stood the test of time, you do realize that there are levels of authenticity there. And in as much as it feels irrelevant, we have seen a lot of companies crash and burn just because the customers realize that, oh, no, these people don't really care about what we think. It's just an easy marketing gimmick to them, right? And also a big factor is erasing, like trying to be universal. And I think I've said this over and over again. In trying to be universal, you sort of lose that that thing that makes you unique. And as it says, like there's this quote: "Generic isn't a competitive strategy. You will just get lost in the markets as well." Sorry. So ideally, for a lot of these African brands we've been dealing with, um, we do tell them that, I mean, that's culture and or that thing that you own, like that product you own, it's not your liability. On the flip side, it is your competitive edge. It is what if you focus on honing or sort of optimizing that, it does a long way. It goes a long way in taking you all the way. And yeah, it's ideally just some last words of last pep talk is don't translate, be the source. I mean, and ideally, don't be generic, right? First of all, from one point, understand what you're dealing with. A lot of us are sitting on this and understand what you're dealing with. Don't and sort of build on it, right? And don't water it down because in the end, a lot of us have, and that's why nowadays you have a lot of conversations on cultural IP and all those things because we are starting to understand the value of these conversations. So yeah, that is, I can stop talking now because yeah, I think that's the end for
All
me.
right.
But
Yeah.
thanks for listening to me
Thanks so much,
go on and
Kofi,
on.
I mean, I think clearly we can see how passionate you are about the whole culture conversation and especially how African brands can tap into some of these hacks as you have made known. So I think it's really a good point that you've raised. You speak about culture as identity, I think, where you're looking at yes, we popularly would say culture is dynamic, so sometimes you're all tempted to be swayed by what is happening, by trends and all that. But in that mix, you realize that if we are all trying to do the same thing, then all the brands now become the same thing. You don't get
Mhm.
to see the distinction in the product or in the services that you offer. So I think it was a very good point to raise that in as much as we need to optimize our product, our service, we shouldn't also lose what makes us the thing. We shouldn't lose that because at the end of the day, that is why your brand or your product or your service will be chosen over the other. So thanks so much, Kofi, for the point you've made on culture as data, especially from the context of African brands. At this point, I think we will open the floor for questions and answers. If you do have any question that you'd want to direct it to whether Mike or Kofi or open, I think you can either request for the microphone or you can just drop the question in the message box. I'll do well to read that. Um, yeah, I think we over the next few minutes, I think we can do that real quick. We have Sterling, I think. Kofi, you're still sharing your screen if you don't mind.
Oh my God, sorry.
Yeah, 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 that's fine. So
Yeah.
yeah, Sterling, you can go ahead with your question.
Okay, thank you. Uh, First off, amazing presentations. I really enjoyed them. And Mike, thank you for making me not sound crazy at my workplace because I've been arguing with people concerning qualitative data versus quantitative data and how much people are so engrossed into quantitative data and making noise about how it gives structure and all of that, but then they forget the lived experiences. So I have two questions, right? One specifically to you, Mike, and then the other to Kofi, but then I think Mike would have to chime in some way, somehow. So my first question is to you, Mike. Considering how much qualitative data explores lived experiences of people, um, and in your line of work, it is more of translating that into market insights and more of business strategies, or yeah, let's say product. Yeah. How, what is that? Where is the line drawn between the meaningful use of that qualitative data, the lived experiences, and then cultural extraction?
And when you say culture extraction, do you mean like an expropriation or like kind of like,
Yes, an
yeah,
expropriation.
dude, such an interesting question, man. You know, Taro, who started Ask One Question, I must say, I got to give him a huge shout out. It's like one of the things that Taro, from the very beginning, when he started Ask One Question, was aware of was like the ability of brands to be like parasitic, you know, to like swoop in, get the information, and then like fly off. They're like, thanks for all the downloads. Now we can be cool. Bye.
Yeah.
And so, you know, part of the strategy that I really like about Taro is this idea of like the importance of long-term relationships with the communities you work with. So, you know, firstly, whoever we work with, we always pay them, and we pay them pretty handsomely, if I do say so myself. But I think more than just kind of the one-off payment, like we as an agency try to maintain a long-term relationship with them. So if we've spoken to someone, you know, sometimes, I mean, literally just the other day, like Taro, like we interviewed a kid a year ago, and like a month ago, Taro, I think, paid for his like Ableton subscription because like the kid's making beats or whatever it is. And there's a real importance in that long-term relationship. But I think maybe this is the best answer of all. What we tell brands is that if you are extractive, the communities will smell it and they won't fuck with you. Like if you
Yeah.
are too exploitative, they are going to smell it and they're going to turn their back on you. Like every single time we talk with a brand, we always are like, hey, you need to not be short-termist. You need to be long-term in your thinking. Like, how do you invest in communities? How do you invest in mentors? How do you invest in infrastructure that people can access? And I'm trying to think how I can. I just did something that's very under NDA, and I'm trying to think how I can tell the story in a way that doesn't breach the NDA. But maybe at a high level, we did some work for a brand, and when we were speaking to the kids, and we were like, "Who's the brand that you guys really like?" And they were like, "Let's say the brand is called Zed." They said, "Oh, we love Zed brand," and we're like, "Why?" And they were like, "Well, because Zed really shows up." And when they do show up for us, they don't always want something from us. Like sometimes Zed will show up
Mhm.
and they don't need us to tweet about it or to post about it on Instagram. They just genuinely will throw money at us to do something cool, and then that's that. Like there's no photo shoot at the end of it. And they're like, that's the dopest thing. Whereas your client can be a bit hit and run, you know? So maybe, so, you know, I think that to answer your question, it's two ways. One, we try to ethically see our relationships with the people we work with as long term. But then I also like to think in a way it's self-regulating. Like if you as a brand are being extractive, people will smell it and they will leave you. Like, and there's a certain kind of moral justice to that, I like to think.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. And then to you, Kofi. First off, I can't believe you're a Man U fan, just like Kwabena. But well, let's put that aside. You spoke initially about data ownership, and I realized how you're passionate about that. Now, my question is, considering data as a culture, who has the right to own the data or interpret it or package it and make profit of it? Is it the people who have the lived experiences? Is it the researcher who comes to extract the information? Or it's the institutions that control the data that has been gathered?
Yeah. So that is, and I think you could speak to 5 different people and you get 5 different answers, right? So ideally, when it comes to who owns the data, and I'm even just going to who owns the data, there was, let me, I think there was a popular ruling in, was it in the UK? And that just takes us back to, I'm just bringing it up because it's created a discourse. And I don't know if, Mike, you came across that. It was, I think, a photographer and I think and a subject, right? And there was this, I think it was one of the more popular, was it J-Lo? I don't really remember. But there was a picture of this person that was taken, I think paparazzi, and I think the celebrity used it. I think posted it on their Instagram, and that's just led to the question. Like, I think it became a court case, and in the end, the photographer claims he has rights to the images because he took the photo. The celebrity claims that it's literally a photo of her. So she owns right to it. And you ask yourself who actually owns the right to it as well. Now, I feel it's always the right culture belongs to the communities, right? And I like the fact that I like what Mike was saying about brands being exploiting all those things. Now, a lot of times I think there are levels of control. Now, I always feel culture always belongs to the communities. I always feel people that want to tap into the cultures, it's not like stealing, but you should be willing to invest into the communities. It's sort of like a trade-off, right? So in the end, if I am, so for example, let me just take this to something more wide. A lot of us should be able to, most of us anyway. Let's take it to Kente, right? So ideally, when it comes to Kente, people say it's owned by, would you say it's owned by the person weaving, or would you say it's owned by the Ashanti community in general, or would you say it's owned by, let's say, if there was this big store, let's say, if Woodin did Kente, and they had sort of claimed ownership of the Kente space, like everyone who sees, even in as much as Kente is a traditional thing, Within had been able to position themselves in a way that when you think Kente, you think of a brand, it's Within, right? Now, I do feel in Within, and I think it all comes to intention, right? Once you give back to the community and not in a performative way, once you're actually investing in the community, it is, and culture is not, I think culture is a living organism. It grows, it evolves. So it is, what part do you have to play in making sure that culture evolves in a positive way? Like, in as much as you're taking, what are you giving back to it, right? So I can't say one particular group owns that. But what I'll say is it takes a village to make sure that it grows from one point to another and it benefits everyone that has a role in making sure that uh, that particular set became identifiable and that became unique. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that land. Thanks a lot, Sterling, for the question, and also Mike and Kofi for the answers. I think we should have two more questions, and that will bring us to the close of the session if we don't have any other. So, Jesse, I think I saw your hand up. After Jesse, then Fia. I hope I'm getting the names right. Fia would go with the question. So, I think ask the questions, and then after the answers would follow. And I think we are getting closer to the end of our time. So if you can be very much more um, snappy with our answer. So Jesse, you have the floor. Now kindly go with your question.
Okay, all right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to the panelists and thanks to you, the moderator, as well. My question I have is, so with the intangible aspect of the product, where Kofi was speaking about the soul that comes with the product, can that be determined from like data in any way? So I guess the question goes to both of them because the data aspect came from Mike and the soul aspect came from Kofi. So that's my little question. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Jesse, for the question. I think I hope Kofi and Mike, I hope you got that question.
Yeah.
I'll move to Fia. What's your question? I saw you have the stage now.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for today's workshop. It's been super helpful. I just have a really quick question, more so directed at Mike, as he mentioned working with I believe vintage or secondhand resellers. Obviously, I'm not going to ask for the specifics, but I wanted to check in because I actually restarted my own vintage shop online, and so it's super new. And one thing that I'm really trying to do at the moment is gather data. Um, I work in strategy myself, but I always find it difficult to apply it to my own things, which is kind of annoying. But would love to know maybe like one or two recommendations for starting there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Fia, for the question. And I think before the answer, you are not in this alone, where you work in strategy, but when it comes to applying some of the skills and knowledge to what you're building, it becomes super difficult. It's always easier when you're working on someone else's brand. I mean, at that point, I mean, you you seem to know a lot, but when you're applying those things to what you're building, it becomes very difficult. So yeah, I think just on that note, I don't think you are alone there. So I think we can start from Fia's question and then Jesse's question, which came earlier, would also be attempted.
I am 100% feel you. You know, like there's that old timey saying, like the cobbler's kids go shoeless. You know, like sometimes the very industry you work in, it's like impossible to turn the mirror back on yourself. So yeah, the secondhand market. I really wish my colleague Santi was here. He's like the real expert on it. I think our outlook on it is really this at the moment. You know, like for decades, the luxury market was targeting the middle class and the upper middle class. And it seems like they have now priced themselves out of those waters, right? Like 30 years ago, you know, you could be like a middle class person in like somewhere in the UK and buy a Louis Vuitton bag, maybe once in a blue moon. No one is buying Louis Vuitton bags unless you're like really rich now, right? And what we are, or at least with millennials and Gen Z, and like what we're seeing in its place is this kind of like desire emerging around like secondhand and vintage, right? That before you'd have the money to buy luxury, but now you still want to demonstrate that you have taste. You want to demonstrate that you have insider cultural knowledge. And so you might do that by finding a really rare piece of X. Maybe it's a Pokemon card or a really interesting jumper or the rare Versace chain, and you find it for half price or a very low price, and then you're able to wear it as like an aficionado of your taste. And so for us, there's this idea of like exploring what are the motivations for people who are entering secondhand and vintage. And obviously different people have different reasons, but we're particularly interested in this idea of like vintage as luxury, like vintage as new luxury where people get to demonstrate taste. And so I think it's a really interesting question to ask, like, well, what is the taste that people are trying to demonstrate? You know, like, is someone trying to show an unbelievable grip on 1970s soul records? Is someone trying to show that they have like a great outlook on like 90s collectible toys? Like, I think in some ways the devil's in the details, because the communities that build around the various vintage verticals are very different. Like the bros who buy secondhand watches are very different from the girlies who are getting like 80s Chanel, who are very different to the people who are collecting comic books. So I think having like a real clean insight as to like the particular vertical you want to play at, where those people hang out, what do they value in the language. Again, I guess it's the case for qualitative. For me, that feels like the really exciting part of the secondhand market. So that's quite a long answer. So I'm going to hand over to Kofi for Jesse's question and allow him to get us over the line.
I'm going to throw the question back to you, and I'll give my view because I feel you might have some insights I may not have, since you work a lot more with data as well. From my point of view, I feel currently, I think with research methods, a lot of research methods do give us more insights into like the thoughts and all those things. Obviously now you're able to get more information, but I still feel I'd like to be traditional and say I still like to think that there are some things that just can't be extracted from the brain of a founder of a brand and
Like
all that.
the intangible stuff.
The intangible stuff, there are just some stuff that can be, but obviously, as time goes on and we are getting even better with research methods and algorithms that sort of help them understand better, I think we're getting close. We're not quite there yet. I'm pretty sure, Mike, since research is your thing, I think you have some more insights on that.
I feel, and I'm gonna like drive off the path a bit and then maybe drive back on and like hear me out. I was watching this video, and it was about one of the weirdest things that we know is like we have this really great evidence from both Prince and Michael Jackson about the process of how they would write music. And we know of this because they were both sued for copyright infringement, where they had to like go on the stand and talk about their experience of like how they would write. And you know, both of them said that like the songs would just like appear in their head. You know, like they didn't have to think it through. They didn't have to like spend this enormous amount of time. Obviously, kind of translating it into a produced song, they would, but often the songs would just like appear wholly formed in their head. And I think there's something there about like the mystery of inspiration, right? And I think with creatives, we're often especially aware of the mystery of like inspiration. But I think with entrepreneurs, sometimes we also miss out that there's that kind of mystery of inspiration. They often just get a problem, they get a need, they get a client thing. So I understand what you're saying, Kofi, about like, can you photocopy what is in like a really true genius's head, or is it kind of this innate, inspiration? What I can tell you is two things. Those entrepreneurs often have a real proximity to the problem or the customer. And there's something about that intimacy that seems to give rise to that real insight. The other thing is that when those companies scale, that inspiration seems to like really dilute. I'm going to say something probably wrong. This is like a bad hot take, but like, you know who only got it right once, but then has just been good at buying other people who's got it right? Is like Mark Zuckerberg, right? Like he got Facebook right, really right once, and then all he's done is like buy WhatsApp, buy Instagram. Every time he's tried to relaunch his own thing, whether it's like the cryptocurrency thing a couple of years ago or the metaverse, like he doesn't really land it anymore. Like he seems to be too far away from like the culture or the problem that he's trying to solve. And let me tell you, if that's the true of Facebook, trust me, like brands that have been around for 200 years, where like the founders long dead or whatever it is, they have that problem like 10 times over. And so I wonder to what degree that aspect of like getting close to data as a founder if you are feeling inspired and you have an intimacy with the problem or with the community, then maybe that data, that qualitative data is not what you need because you are inspired. Maybe what you need is that big quantitative data set to see who's going to click what and what's going where, and you have that big scaled out view. But certainly, like a lot of the customers we work with are these big corporates that have kind of lost their way in the woods, and that's what you're trying to recreate for them, is a feeling of intimacy to the problem and the community that have it. I feel like I've gone in a very around way of trying to answer your question. I mean, was that all right?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything has to do with the mystery of inspiration, the proximity to problems, and all that. So I think I would want to believe the answer provided some insight. Do we have any other questions? If not, I think we can bring the conversation to an end. The whole session was recorded and will be published on YouTube after. So, if you still want to catch up on certain fine details that you may have missed on the call, we will do share the link around so that you can catch up. Any last statement, one final sentence, not paragraphs, just a very, very brief thing that you would want us to leave home with from this conversation. I'll start with you, Mike, and then Kofi goes.
Just my sincere thanks to everyone who tuned in today. It's so wonderful to be able to keep this space with you guys. And yeah, thank you so much for creating this platform, and my enormous gratitude.
That was 7 seconds. Kofi, can you beat him to 7 seconds?
Yeah, just thank you to everyone for being here. Let's keep the conversations rolling.
All right, all right, all right. That's fine. Thank you so much for this. Like I said, we would be, I think as part of your registration, we asked if you'd be interested in further conversations like this. Definitely this wouldn't be the last of it. We will from time to time convene and share ideas around things that would push our brands, things that will push our business, things that will push our products and services forward. Thanks, Mike, for making time for us. Thanks, Kofi, also for sharing your insights. And to all the other people who stayed to this point. I think big respect and thanks to all of you. We'll stay in touch. All the best. And the Arsenal fans in there, go have fun. Go have fun. I'm on your case today because, yeah, it's very, very historical. So, all the best, guys. Cheers.
Bye, everyone.